Welcome to the 14th tutorial of my Tableau Server Client series. This series is dedicated to showcasing how to use Tableau Server Client to automate various tasks. In this video, I walk you through how to chain or execute in a sequential manner those flows published to your Tableau server using Tableau Server Client. If you are curious as to the advantages to being able to trigger flows programmatically, then please check out the beginning of my previous video where I discuss a handful of those benefits. You can also see a handful of bullets here that I speak to in that video. Let's get started with developing a script that will allow me to chain the execution of two flows. To get started, let's talk a little bit more about what we're trying to achieve here. The purpose of this tutorial is to showcase how to chain the execution of flows together. And what does that mean? Well, we're trying to execute one flow, and as soon as that flow finishes, trigger the next flow. For this example, we're going to be running two flows that are maintained on my Tableau Cloud server, or Tableau Cloud instance, excuse me. Those two flows are going to be software sales and hardware sales. So we're going to run these two. And the way we're going to configure this is we're going to trigger this flow to run, wait for it to finish. And as soon as it successfully executes, we're going to then trigger this flow. So on Tableau Server, you will know this or refer to this as a linked task. We would come in here and we would say, okay, I want to schedule a linked task. I want to say, run this one and then run the hardware sales one, right? So as soon as this finishes, let's run this. Unfortunately, using Tableau Server Client in its current release, this capability is not available. But what we can do is we can write logic in our Python script that's going to say, hey, trigger North America software sales, wait for it to finish, and as soon as it finishes, trigger the next flow, which is going to be the hardware sales flow. And we can do that just like a linked task does, right? So instead of triggering a linked task, we're going to trigger the two flows independently. And we're going to build in some logic that says, hey, continue to try to execute this flow until it succeeds. And don't move on to the second flow in this linked task or chaining until it does finish successfully. All right, so let's get back to Visual Studio Code. How are we going to go about doing this? Well, we're going to use this standard configuration / setup block that you'll see throughout all of my tutorials. This block is going to allow us to create an authentication object that's going to be used to authenticate and connect to my Tableau server. Let's go ahead and run this. The next step is we're going to use that authentication object to sign in to my server. So I've just ran both of these blocks to make sure they work properly. And now this is the part where we're going to actually create the chaining of these two flows that I just showcased on my Tableau Cloud instance. To do that, we first want to write or implement a way to retrieve just those two flows from my Tableau Cloud server, Tableau Cloud instance. And the way we're going to do that is just like in our previous video where we created the filter request to get just one flow, we're going to create a filter request to return two flows. And those two flows are going to be the two that I just showcased, so North America software sales and North America hardware sales. So to do that, let's just say create a filter for the request. We're going to use the request options class. So to do that, so I'm going to say request options. This is just like you would have seen in my previous video, except again, we're going to pull in two flows as opposed to one. So I'm going to say tsc.requestOptions. And then I'm going to add a filter to this. And how are we going to filter? We're going to filter on the name of the flow. And this needs to be capitalized. And let's also use the operator in. So I'm going to filter to where the name of the flow is either North America software sales or North America hardware sales. And the operator we're going to use is going to be in that case, right? So because I'm looking for matches on two flows. So I'm going to say .request options, .operator, .in, and we're going to provide that list of two flows. So North America hardware, let's do software first, and then North America hardware sales. Okay. All right, so we have our filter. I'm just going to go ahead and run this to make sure there's no typos in this filter. Okay, so that successfully works. What we're going to do here is then we're going to Like you saw in my flows video, so if you watched the video on generating a flows report, or you've watched my previous video, what we're going to do is we're going to use list comprehension to iterate through the flows that are maintained on my Tableau Cloud instance and find those two flows using the request options filter. We're going to store both of those flows, or those flow objects, in a list. So let's go ahead and say with the flows specified in the request filter. And how again are we going to do this? We're going to say flows is equal to flow for flow in tsc.pager. And we're going to say server.flows, so we're going to use the flows endpoint. And we're going to use request options. So this is going to be our filter that we're going to implement. And this is super important to do because here this task is just, hey, I want to chain the execution of two flows together. I don't need to pull in every flow into this list object, right? I just need these two. So let's go ahead and make sure we have a proper filter in place to ensure that we have just two flows in this list as opposed to hundreds, and maybe if you have a very large server or a Tableau Cloud instance, you have thousands, right? Let's just pull in those two. And then what we're going to do is, again, because we're not triggering an actual linked task on the server where we've already configured it to say run software sales first and then run hardware sales, we actually want to develop a way that's always going, or let's say deterministically ensure that the software sales flow is run first and then the hardware sales. A way to do that is, let me just type this out. So ensure North America software sales flow is always executed first. One way to do this is, again, we're going to create a pseudo link task, so a fake link task here, but it operates exactly how you would see on the server if you were to actually create one manually. Let's do this. So let's say sorted flows. So we're taking that list of flows, so we're going to sort it. How are we going to sort it? We're going to sort it based on the keys, and I'm going to say lambda, and let's go ahead and escape this thing so it gets out of our way. Say key equals lambda, and then so for each flow, let's do 0 if the flow.name is equal to North America software sales, excuse me. Else 1. And we need a little end quote here. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a sorted flows list that's based on the value of the flow name. This needs to be software. And what do we have here? We have an error. Sorted flows, comma, key, lambda, flow, for flow, 0. There's an if that needs to be here. 0 if flow. So if the flow is named North America software sales, tag it with a 0, otherwise 1. What that's going to do is it's going to ensure that we're able to run this one first every time, regardless of how the flow items or objects are returned in this list. So the order is not going to matter as long as we do this. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to trigger each flow to run and then wait for the response like we saw in the previous video, except here we're going to be using two flows. Let me go ahead and scroll down so we can see a little bit better here. All right, so for this, we're going to say for flow and link task. And again, that link task is just that sorted list, right? And we're going to iterate through, and it's going to be, so the first flow that we're going to be operating on is going to be the North America software sales. And again, that's the result of this sorting here. We're going to say retry is equal to true. So why am I doing retry equals to true? You're going to see here in a moment that I'm going to use a while loop to ensure that we continuously attempt to execute the North America software sales flow until it completes successfully. And as soon as it does complete successfully, we're going to move on to the next flow, right? So let's do while retry, and what I'll do is I'll just type a little note out here so that's evident. Until it succeeds. So while retry, we're going to say job is equal to server.flows.refresh, and which flow we're going to refresh, our run, we're going to refresh the flow that we're currently operating on. And in this case, during the first iteration, that is again this flow here. And then what we'll do is we'll just do a few print statements here. So I'm going to say print, and then I say job.id is running. And And then just like in the previous video, we're going to do a try except else block to print out some of these details. So we're going to state the flow either successfully executed, and here are the details, or there was an exception and the flow failed. So any exception that's raised when trying to refresh a flow is going to cause the flow to not execute. So we're just going to continuously retry until there's a successful execution. You need to tab in here, try, and say job is equal to server.jobs.waits for job, and we're going to pass in the job. Except, so if there is an error or some exception raised, we're going to print out a response, and the response is going to be the job, which job, so the job.id, and it failed. Retrying. So let's just say retrying. Again, this try except else block that we're writing in the details, this is all optional. It's just a feedback loop that you can provide yourself or whoever's executing the script to know what's going on. And then else, so here's the lengthy part. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to type this and then I'll continue chatting about it here in a moment. So I'm going to say job finished successfully. And then let's do 2 new lines here. And then let's say job details. So this is going to look just like we did in our previous video where we ran a single flow. If you watch that flow, this will be familiar to you. And I don't actually need F strings here, right? So for these two, I don't really need, I'm not putting any variables in here, so I don't need that to be an actual F string, but I do need this one to be, so I'm going to say job ID, so which job was ran. I'm going to say job.id, and then new line, and then another line, we're going to say the flow name, so which flow was run. Not many people are going to be memorizing the job ID values. This can be useful if you look on the front end of your Tableau server. You're going to see that in the jobs page that this is going to be the ID that you're going to be able to find in there to look up the actual progress of the execution, whether it completed, failed, it's in progress on your Tableau server or Tableau Cloud instance. Let's do flow name, do flow.name, and then another new line. And then what we're going to do is we're going to showcase, okay, this is when the job was created, this is when the job started, and this is when the job ended. So sometimes, depending on the queuing process, you may trigger this job or this script, and the job doesn't immediately run, but it's created, but the start time is not the same as the time when it was created. And that could be because there's 10 flows ahead of it, or the priority is lower than some other flows. There's a wide range of factors that could attribute to as to why this flow didn't immediately kick off. So I'm going to say job created time, and the attribute for the job created time is going to be job created at. And what I'll do is I'm just going to copy and paste this. Job started time. This will be job.started at. And let's do job end time, and this is going to be job.completed at. All right, so we have a response. This block again is just going to showcase, hey, this job finished successfully. Here are the details, the job ID, the flow name, and then the date and time for which the job was created, when it actually started, and when it completed. So just to revisit what we're doing here, I'm going to go ahead and just print this out real quick. So print response, and then we're going to say retry is equal to false. So why are we putting retry equals to false? Well, I'm using a while loop to continuously attempt to execute this flow. And as soon as it executes successfully, I want to set this to false so that we continue to the next flow, right? Because this is saying while true, because retry is initially set to true, continue to the next flow. Right, so when we get to the next flow, retry will then be set back to true again, and it will be true until the flow executes successfully, right? Because the retry is being set to false in this else block. Okay, so what we'll do now is we're going to go ahead and run this. All right, so the job was created and it was kicked off. So here's the job ID. Again, this isn't particularly useful to you unless you're going to the Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud Instances front end and going to your jobs page and wanting to look up, okay, what is the status of this job? Assuming you don't have a means to see that here in your IDE or some other method. So this is running. And because I'm on a Tableau developer instance, my jobs may not kick off as soon as I've triggered it, right? I just don't have the resources to ensure that immediately upon clicking or executing the script that it's going to kick off. So let's see what happens here. Could take a moment. This could be in pending right now if we look at my front end. So if I go to my front end real quick and we go to the actual flow. So let's see what's going on. Okay, so it's in pending run. So it's successfully triggered, but it's pending a run. And again, this goes back to I'm on a developer instance, so things aren't going to happen as swiftly as maybe you might enjoy whenever you're on your cloud instance or your server instance. A lot of times that's going to kick off immediately. So it's still in pending. Okay, so it succeeded. It took 3 seconds to run. That succeeded. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code to see what happened. So we should be getting a response here. And we did. Okay, so it's printed out here. So the job finished successfully. Here are the details, the job ID, which was kicked off. It's here. The flow name, North America Software Sales, the created time, the time the job actually started, and then the end time. And then you'll see that it's moving on to the next flow, which is going to be our hardware sales. So if I go back to my Tableau Cloud instance again, and I go to my hardware sales flow, you're going to see, okay, well, it actually succeeded already. So now let's go back. So it succeeded in 4 seconds, a very quick flow. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code and check out the response here. All right, so we also got the feedback that the jobs have finished successfully, and here are the details, right? So here is the flow name, the job created time, the start time, and the actual end time. Now, this job ID here, again, so what I'm referring to on the front end, if you need to use this, if you find this useful, if you want to know what you can use this for, go to your front end of your Tableau server or cloud instance, go to jobs, and you're going to see that the locally unique identifier is stored here for this job, right? So this matches what you saw in my terminal or my console, sorry, a moment ago. So this is the hardware sales flow that ran a moment ago, and this is the software sales flow. So let's just go back, keep those in mind, and go back to Visual Studio Code, and you'll see that those are the ID values that match. One thing to note here is that with the upcoming release of 0.33 of Tableau Server Client, you will no longer have to use the method I've showcased today to create a pseudo linked task. You will be able to configure the linked task on your Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance and specify that you would like to trigger the linked task. I will likely make a short update video on the topic when the new release is available, but for now, simply fetch the flows you would like to chain together and order the execution of those flows accordingly using the sorted list method I've shown in this video or another means. That wraps up this video on chaining the execution of flows programmatically through Tableau Server Client. I hope you found this tutorial useful and can use the concepts I've covered to level up your ability to manage your own Tableau server through automation. If you enjoyed this video, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel for notifications on future videos. Thank you again, and see you next time.